Hello, everyone. I'm just going to try and see if I can start this recording before I actually start the official webinar here. All right. So I hope everyone can see the screen in front of you. My name is Ryan Jarles. I'm the Cultural Resources Planner here at the Chatham County-Savannah Metropolitan Planning Commission. We have several other employees that are working in my department as well. Leah G. Mahalik being our Director of Historic Preservation, Allison Smith being the Historic Preservation Planner, and Sandy Michelle. She's the Historic Preservation Planner, Development Services Planner, and she also works with our Advanced Planning Department. Let's see if I can get to the next slide. So this is going to be a webinar as part of our Virtual Preservation Month with the Metropolitan Planning Commission. Here you see a little flyer with our scheduled virtual events. So May is Preservation Month, and every year in May, local preservation groups, state historical societies, businesses, civic organizations, pretty much everyone across the country celebrates Preservation Month, which actually began in 1973 as just a week-long celebration, but the National Trust did expand that to be a month-long celebration. So our scheduled events last week, if you joined in, was a webinar hosted by Leah G. Mahalik, the Director of Historic Preservation, on Savannah and historic preservation. This week, today, is me hosting the webinar on Savannah's original squares. Next week, you'll find a link on our website for a video tutorial on window reglazing. And throughout the month, our preservation planner, Allison Smith, has been doing daily posts, sometimes multiple posts a day on our Instagram, which you can see below, the MPC Historic Preservation, which she's been posting things like historic photographs, book recommendations, showing buildings that have been lost in the city and other fun little events. So hopefully everyone will keep with us and finish out the month on our Historic Preservation Month celebration virtually due to our certain circumstances going on. So this, as you saw last week with the Historic Preservation Beginnings with Leah, let me get to, oh no, it's opened the wrong thing here. So let's get back to the actual. So I'm just going to pause my screen real fast while I go find that. It seems to have opened the wrong one. This is better. We're going to find mine now. Haha. So now you're going to see my next slide, which is actually going to be a quick thanks to a couple of people. One big, ginormous thanks to the Georgia Historical Society, which you learned a bit more about last week with Leah's presentation. But several of the photographs, a lot of the photographs you're going to be seeing are held within their archives, their digital archives. They can be found online at their website that you see listed there. You'll also want to be giving a big thanks to, again, Leah G. Mahalik, our Director of Historic Preservation. She has helped a lot in helping me learn especially more about Savannah and Savannah Squares, as well as Allison Smith, who has helped a lot as well. So some of what you're going to be seeing are things that they've taught me here at during my time at the MPC. And so we're going to start Savannah's original squares. A lot of people don't realize that Oglethorpe didn't magically create, those 24 squares that we ended up with today with the 22. So people often think of Savannah squares as being these magical, places where people can wander through, they're public, but it wasn't always really that way. because unlike other places, ours were originally public, but originally in most places, like in Europe, they were places for the wealthy upper crust to, walk through, and they were kind of closed off. A lot of times they were by invitation only. So Savannah's kind of different in that. But we, eventually change a little bit. But so Savannah is originally started by this man here. And he is General Oglethorpe. And in 1732, he sets off with several, around 114, I believe, not essentially all poor people, but people who were kind of in search of a better life. They end up originally going to South Carolina, but in 1733, King George has officially kind of taken this land and has formed Georgia as kind of a buffer colony between the Carolinas as well as Florida, the Spanish to the south. So you'll see in some of the pictures that I provide, we see kind of a fort, a shape to the city of Savannah, because it was that kind of in between, that protecting space. So that's not actually the boat he came in. That's just a fun picture I found in our archives of a ship similar to what he would have been on. So here again is a little bit of James Oglethorpe. He states this in 1733, and this is kind of just about how he has decided to lay out property here and form this city, which originally he wanted to be more of an egalitarian society where there would be, things like slavery would have been banned, other things like alcohol, lawyers were banned in that original small plan of his, and these spaces at that point would be more of an equal opportunity for everybody. And now my slide is stuck, it would seem, as well. We're just having all kinds of fun with some difficulties here and there, but that's okay. So let's make it to the next slide. If it'll go. There we go. A lot of people wonder where James Oglethorpe got his, plans for forming the city with all of these different squares and all of those blocks coming off of it. And a lot of people attribute it to his studies of different towns throughout Ireland. This is a picture, obviously I stole from Wikipedia, not the most credible source, but it got me this nice little photograph. And it was places like this that a lot of people think that he did get those ideas from. We're not really sure, though, of the official ideas. You will see, though, if I can get to my next slide again, we just keep having some little difficulties in our lives here for some reason. So just give me a minute while I try and load this screen. The next slide will come up, I promise. Just give me a moment. Maybe if I click it 100 times more, it'll go to the next slide. So let me just give some more fun facts while we wait for that. Again, on that equal opportunity kind of thing, it wouldn't just be kind of the design aspect of it. It would actually be written into law that these kinds of equal treatments would be formed throughout the area. Again, things like slavery was banned, but you would also see things like Indian property being respected, and every member coming to the community would essentially be promised land. There we go. We did it. So Oglethorpe designed the city as a series of equally sized neighborhoods. Today we call them wards. Each ward would include equal space for civic buildings at the center and housing on identical sized lots around that. At the center of each ward would be the public square, as you see here in this historic map of Oglethorpe Square. Just to get a little more specific though, before we move forward, the basic plan for the ward would be about 600 feet to a side in the north and south direction. So this longer side. And then from the east-west direction would be about 540 to 600 feet. Streets and buildings and lots are organized around that central open space. And then each ward would be given a name. So wards were originally organized, again, just as an urban neighborhood with direct correlation to garden or farm lots. And you would see that again in the expanded version of Oglethorpe's plan that we see today. So again, get a little bit more specific on this ward, just so that we know what we're talking about. The streets bounding the wards, so on these outer regions here, provide uninterrupted movement of the flow of traffic. So originally those horse-drawn carriages, later you see cars, obviously today, hopefully more so bicycles, but that's not for today. So when you get to the inside though, in the center here, you're going to see the resultant pattern featuring 8 blocks to a ward, with a larger 4 blocks on the north and south sides of the square, which these would be termed tithing blocks. And then 4 smaller blocks front the squares on the east and west. These would be termed the trust blocks. The tithing blocks, they kind of differ, but are mostly subdivided into lots of 60 feet in width. Sometimes would be further divided into increments of 30 or 20 feet, which did help create the diverse pattern in building sizes and types that we do get to enjoy today. Savannah's plan originally reflected kind of a political and organizational considerations of the day. Each ward had tithing men, so that's kind of where you're getting this tithing block word as well. They would share guard and other duties, and wards would be tied to a larger, again, regional plan of garden and farm lots. And then due to the repetitive non-hierarchical placement of wards, squares, equal size lots, the plan was reflecting upon, again, that egalitarian, the utopian ideals of Oglethorpe's colony that he was forming. And then the regularity of these lots controlled the size and rhythm of development in kind of the third dimension, which does give you the visually diverse and humanly scaled city that you're going to be seeing photographs of in just a little bit. And here's just kind of another view of that original plan. So you're seeing those blocks kind of evenly distributed. This is kind of an idea of what it could have looked like with these same-sized buildings, same-sized lots, and things like that. Later on, though, when we were talking about, that egalitarian society, how kind of everyone was almost equal, there were all these different things that were illegal. Well, that vision wouldn't magically always stay as it was planned. So Georgia would ultimately reverse that slavery ban in 1750. And it wasn't long after that that you see this class structure or a hierarchy, kind of a modern European style city would begin to form at that point. So you'd see the wealth of the city begin constructing these huge palatial homes fronting the squares, as this one you see here, the Owens Thomas House. Later in the background, you would see a large apartment building that's actually there today. But the poorer people would actually be relegated to the edges. So the wealthy would actually begin using these spaces, holding events, gatherings, kind of things like that. And you'll see in some of the photographs large gateways and fences built up around these squares, kind of giving you less of an idea of them being public, but more so private for the use of those wealthier members of the community. So you are probably wondering, where the first ones are located and what years they were put in. But we're going to focus on two dates, 1733 and then a little after that, 1735, when you see the full six kind of laid out. But the first three are thought of, planned, and laid out in 1733. First of which you'll see Johnson Square. The three after that, though, the other four originals, had different names. So you do see Johnson Square always holding that name, but Wright Square was actually originally called Percival Square. Ellis Square was called Decker Square originally, and Telfair Square is originally known as St. James Square. So you'll see those names change later on. So we're going to start with Johnson Square, the very first one laid out. It was the first of the squares. It does remain the largest today of all of the completed 24. It was named after Roberts Johnson, who at the time was colonial governor of South Carolina. And you'll see an obelisk at the center of that square, which now currently serves as a memorial to General Greene. At the time that it was constructed, though, the obelisk didn't really commemorate any specific event or individual. And it was kind of due to financial restrictions that the unmarked obelisk would serve as this like centerpiece for the square for so long. And also, again, due to financial constraints, it for a while would kind of commemorate two people, the Greene family as well as Casimir Pulaski. So inscriptions honoring Greene were added in 1886. And then later on, in 1901, he would actually be moved to be buried, his remains underneath that. So it also contains two fountains as well as a sundial dedicated to Colonel William Bull, the namesake of Savannah's Bull Street. And another namesake, which you'll see, is the Johnson Square Business Center, the building formerly known as the Savannah Bank Building. It was the first skyscraper built in 1911. So here's a good view of where Johnson Square is located. You can see 6 original squares here, and then this is actually a later map, so you do see additional squares added in. Here's a good kind of collection of some photographs of Johnson Square. At the top right, you see this is, Christ Church. It was constructed in 1838, but this photograph here is about 1910 probably. And it essentially looks the same today. You'll see that it today is cleaned up, that ivy's gone, things like that. The bottom center is a 1930s view. You'll see City Hall in the background, so this one's facing north. To the top left, you're going to see this is Johnson Square, but we're looking southwest, and this is about 1931. So it is featuring several buildings that you'll see in modern photographs don't exist. So unfortunately, we did lose those. So to the bottom left, though, you'll see the Pulaski House. Again, another building that was lost and is currently the site of a very large parking garage. But the building that housed the stables for the Pulaski House actually still does exist. It's just a little further tucked back in there. And there's also a small bank building you don't see in this photograph, but you'll see later that was constructed in 1913. So let's just talk about that picture up at the top left again. I mentioned several things were gone. You'll see at the corner to the right is seen in maps as the industrial building. It's built in 1909, and to the right of that would have been the Whitney Hotel, which would have been built in 1916. And I did find some interesting information on the Whitney Hotel. Sorry, let me point on it. The interior walls were actually constructed of brick and terracotta tiles. And then one fun fact I find is that it was known to be fireproof. So I guess to prove that it was as fireproof as they said it was, they decided not to include any form of fire suppressant. So there's not even fire extinguishers of any type located in that building at the time. So it's kind of interesting that it did survive as long as it did. to the left, that corner, is the Savannah Hotel. It was constructed in 1912. The rear, kind of behind it, tucked back, was actually constructed in 1919, a little bit later. And then to the left of that was another hotel, the Victory Hotel. So this is just a big string of hotels, pretty much different than what you see today, but also Savannah is still currently full of hotels, so it's not like we changed a whole lot since then. And then here again is that modern view I was talking about. So that kind of selection of really nice historic hotels was located here. And today we see this building, obviously not what a lot of people would want to see, but you do see on that corner, we do have one surviving really nice historic structure. And then here's that smaller bank building I spoke about as well, can still be seen in the square. And obviously the monuments to the center and the fountains exist today. So moving on to the second square that's formed, we have Wright Square. And Wright Square is established originally, like I said, as Percival Square. It was named originally for Lord Percival, generally regarded as the man who gave the colony of Georgia its name, as a tribute to Great Britain's King George II. However, the square would later be renamed in honor of James Wright in 1763. The third and final royal governor of Georgia. Throughout its history, it's been known as Courthouse Square, Post Office Square, several different names. So it is the present Tomochichi Federal Building and U.S. Courthouse host. You know, it hosts those two large buildings. So let me give you some good idea of where that's located. So the second square was actually the one adjacent to the south. You would assume they'd want to go kind of in order, but it goes straight back. So originally there was this kind of north-south line here. And here's some photographs of that square historically. Now I will, right off the bat, tell you I have no idea what dates these were taken. These are from our archives and there was no date associated with them, but it does give a good showing of, you know, those fences I spoke about earlier, kind of surrounding the square in various places. So this, let me get a little more descriptive on what you're seeing in these pictures. To the top left, you have an 1880s old county courthouse. This was demolished sometime around 1889, and it was probably built around 1833. In the middle, you have what you can still see today, the federal courthouse. This is probably a picture from the 19-teens. Not sure on the exact date. The southern half of this building that you're seeing in the picture was 1889 for a construction date, and the northern half, which you can go see today, was constructed in 1931. This is also the square where you find the large Lutheran church, the Chatham County Courthouse, the post office courthouse, and historically, you would actually find in this square, as I was looking through some maps, a strange amount of furniture stores. A lot of people were needing some furniture back then. So the yellow courthouse that you're going to see when I go to the next set of pictures was constructed in 1889. And that's down here. You'll see a blueprint building from 1955, the Wells Fargo building, just to the edge of this that's not pictured here, was built in 1890. And you'll see up here a really nice commercial building from the 1920s, probably from about 1921 is when it's constructed. So this is actually a really good, diverse square today, showing how things changed over time here in the city. So that's a good square to go to if you want to witness several styles of architecture, several eras of architecture as well. So let's move on to square 3, probably a square a lot of people know a lot of information about just because of what has occurred in that square. So it was originally called Decker Square. So that's maybe one thing a lot of people don't know about. It was originally named after Sir Matthew Decker. He was one of the trustees for the original establishment of the colony of Georgia and director of the East India Trading Company as well, and a member of Parliament. But the square would later be named after Sir Henry Ellis. He's the second royal governor of the colony of Georgia. The square originally houses and here's a good picture of it. It originally houses the city market. So we do still refer to the area as City Market today. But what you're seeing was something that was demolished in 1955 for a parking garage, which several pictures of that parking garage exist. This gets torn down though, luckily in 2005, and the square is restored somewhat. Obviously, you're not going to get those historic buildings back. So this is kind of what you would see today walking around Ellis Square. And it's essentially mostly new buildings. You do get several buildings built in the 1820s. You get buildings built in the 1920s located in areas around that square, but you mostly see, at least what's more noticeable, are buildings like the Ondas, this parking garage, the K building, which are all modern buildings from the 2000s. And so a lot of people in preservation, we're excited, yes, obviously, that we get this square back, but we do see that very large loss of the original City Market building, which is kind of honored and commemorated in a strange way. If you go just south of this area downtown, you can find the downtown Savannah Kroger, which is kind of modeled after that original City Market. So you do get that kind of idea of that design going on in that area. So moving on to TELFAIR Square, another very heavily altered square. You can kind of see in this photograph I took, you only see modern buildings from this angle, which is unfortunate, but this square was originally going to be called St. James Square in honor of a green space in London, England, marked one of the most fashionable neighborhoods in early Savannah. It was renamed in 1883 to honor the TELFAIR family. So it's the only square honoring a family rather than an individual. The TELFAIRs included former Governor Edward TELFAIR, Congressman Thomas TELFAIR, and the one most people know about, Mary TELFAIR. So she was the benefactor of Savannah's TELFAIR Museum of Art. And the square also contains tributes to the Girl Scouts of America, founded by the Savannah Julia Gordon Low, and to the chambered Nautilus. TELFAIR Square is located here, and you'll see several really beautiful photographs here of what you would have seen on this square. So let me describe a couple of them to you. In 1818, the Knights of Pothra, I'm not going to pronounce anything right, but it was known as their castle. Later on, it would be torn down in 1975 to become what you see now as the large Corps of Engineers building. And then the 1910 structure, a 1910 structure, was demolished to build a really beautiful Jepson Center. So you kind of give and take. There was also a church located on this square, which still exists to the left of this building. That church was constructed between 1848 and 1850. And then obviously you do have to talk about this really beautiful building here, which we just refer to as the TELFAIR today, the TELFAIR Academy, constructed in 1819. So let's just give a good look at what the square looked like after most of the changes. So let's get a good look at this view right here, though. I did happen to take a little snapshot of what you see today looking in this same exact space up at the top right. So you see that over here. So today you still get that view kind of the courthouse in the back, but you also get modern views going on. So you see this structure here, and then currently a structure being constructed. This is a very construction-filled square. As you can see, there's also a structure here just adjacent to the CVS building. So here again is that Jepson Center, what the TELFAIR building looks like today, and what you see currently where that one beautiful historic building was located. So those were the ones constructed in 1733, and you get several dates because obviously a square is not formed in one single year. Things happen throughout it. So I've given some dates here. We're going to say officially Reynolds Square is opened in 35 and Oglethorpe in 42 of the 1700s. But you're going to see some dates throughout that are kind of all over the place. So Reynolds Square here, right adjacent to, facing the river, that very first square. So it does get a nice prime location there. Originally, this is actually going to be called the Lower Square. And this is going to be laid out in 1734, like I said, and was later renamed for Captain John Reynolds, governor of Georgia in the mid-1750s. Reynolds, in fact, was an unpopular governor, and it's said that the celebration held upon his arrival in the colony was rivaled only by that held upon his departure. So that's a fun fact. The square does contain a bronze statue by Marshall Doherty honoring John Wesley, and he was the founder of Methodism, who spent most of his time in England but did undertake a mission here in Savannah. So the statue you're seeing was installed in 1969 on the spot where Wesley's home is believed to have stood. Obviously, we don't really know that for sure, but it is intended to show his preaching outdoors as he would have done, leading services for specifically Native Americans in the area, a practice which would later anger church elders who believed that the gospel should only be preached inside of the church building. So later you'll see church buildings obviously being built everywhere. Reynolds Square is the site of the filature which housed silkworms as part of an early and unsuccessful attempt to establish a silk industry here in the Georgia colony. And that would be located on Abercorn between Bryan and Congress Streets. And this is also where you'll see the old pink house and some photographs when I get to it. So this is a nice 1970s photograph, early 80s maybe, of the pink house. You also see several other not so historic photographs from around that time. But what you do see, you'll see the Planters Inn, or what is currently called the Planters Inn here on the corner. This would be constructed originally in 1912, but you see huge changes and additions happening in 1921. And then next door, this small building is also this building up to the left, constructed about 1813. It's a really nice example of the federal style coming into Savannah. You also see down here the Lucas Theater, built around 1921, a very, very nice example of Mediterranean mixture with Greek and Art Deco and all kinds of really beautiful things happening. And here is a good example. You can see streetcars did exist in Savannah, and so this is where one of those streetcars would have been located. A modern version of Reynolds Square is very different again than what you would have seen historically. Yes, we get to keep the old pink house built in 1789, so that's really cool that we still get to have something that's almost essentially from when the square was formed. But you also see obviously modern buildings built in the 1950s into the 2000s around the square as well. You'll see a lot of the original squares house, unfortunately, parking garages, because that's something that came about. You see cars finally coming to a small city full of tiny little squares. What are you going to do with all those cars? You have to house them somewhere. So you do see a lot of modern buildings coming up that house cars now. And then you also see, again, a nice little 1919 shopping center building located in that square as well. Oglethorpe Square, this is going to be the final square that we talk about. But it's near and dear to our hearts here at the MPC because, as you see to the left, that's where we are located. I'm hiding inside of this space down here currently speaking to you. And so this square is going to be originally called the Upper New Square. Officially, I'm going to say it's laid out with its final ideas and plans by 1742, and we're located here in Oglethorpe Square. This is a good example of some historic spaces throughout this square that are very notable. This happens to have been laid out the same year of the Spanish invasion of Georgia, so maybe that plays a role in what you see kind of throughout this square. But it's named later on after it was known as Upper New Square, actually after the original founder, General James Oglethorpe. This is the last square he sees constructed, and I guess that would play a huge part in why you would name it after him. And then there's also a statue of Oglethorpe, not even located in the square, but located in Chippewa Square, a little walk away. So the home of General's first royal governor, John Reynolds, was located on the southeast trust lot, which is now the parking lot of what you would see at the President's Quarters Inn, overlooking Oglethorpe Square. He arrived in Savannah in 1829, or October 29th, 1754. I don't know where I got the number 18 from. The residences of the royal surveyors of Georgia and South Carolina were located on the northeast trust lots. That's where you would see the Owens Thomas House today. And the President's Quarters Inn, a 16-room historic bed and breakfast, is located still on the southeast trust lots. So that is one good thing we got to keep. You'll notice if you walk through this square, a pedestal honoring the Moravian missionaries who arrived at the same time as John Wesley and settled in Savannah from about 1735 to 1740, before actually moving on to go to Pennsylvania. A Savannah veterans group actually had proposed, unsuccessfully proposed, erecting a memorial to the veterans of World War II within Oglethorpe Square, which you'll see later gets installed on River Street. So you can see that today on River Street. Another interesting thing about this area, today we drive down streets known as State Street and President Street. Prior to us transitioning from being a colony to the state of Georgia, you would have been driving down Prince Street and King Street. So Prince Street now is State Street, and King Street now is President Street to honor our president instead of an English king. So let's look at some of these beautiful photographs here of Oglethorpe Square. You do have the Graham Apartments, which exist today. They're constructed in the 1920s. This really beautiful historic maritime hospital up here. You see that Owens Thomas House from 1819, and you kind of see what a square got to look like when it was fully full of plants. Today, Oglethorpe Square, as you'll see in the next photographs, is kind of open. You see a lot around it. You do see that Maritime Hospital still existing, Owens Thomas House still existing, and that 1920s apartment building. So this is a really prime example of apartment buildings that are being constructed around Savannah. It's actually one of the larger ones you see, other than ones located over on Liberty Street. But you do see smaller versions of this throughout Savannah. You do see, unfortunately, and I'm going to go into some preservation talk again here, this building down on the lower left. This is currently where I'm located, giving you this webinar right now, underneath the State Street parking garage, which is home to the Metropolitan Planning Commission. But what was here before? So we are here. This is a large parking garage now, right? You'll see several little things going on, but you do see this large Avon Theater. Originally, it was not for movies. Originally, before this bridge is constructed over the lane that you see up here above to the right of Avon Theater, it was a small theater located just on Bronze Street. Later on, that small theater on Bronze Street would be just the entrance, and then you would walk through the lane here into the actual Avon Theater, where you would be able to see movies. And this was constructed in 1945. Later on, though, it is torn down, obviously, to build this really nice building that I'm inside of today. So this is my office. Unfortunately, it's not what it looks like anymore, but this is where I would have been located. If we kept this space here, we would have been inside of a theater. And this is, again, that entrance located on Bronze Street. So these are just some things that were lost in Savannah, and now we get to be inside of different buildings. So it's kind of a give and take really with preservation. You do get really beautiful parts of something, right? We still have that entrance to the Avon Theater is now a restaurant, but we get something different like a parking garage where a large historic movie theater was. So just again, I wanted to thank everyone for listening to me speak and blab about Savannah Squares. I didn't want to keep anyone too long because it's a Monday and I know everyone has a lot to do. But just keep in mind that we're not finished yet. Preservation Month still has some ways to go. So on May 18th, 2020, there'll be a video tutorial on window reglazing available on our website. And again, keep track of what we're doing on our Instagram. Allison's posting up a storm. She's given us some good content. And again, you can send any later questions that you come up with or discussion to this phone number down here if you want to speak to me. But if anyone has any questions, I'm going to go back to the beginning of this here. And then I'm going to start accepting questions through the chat or any discussion anyone has through the chat box. You can also, I think there's a raise your hand option, but I think it might just be easier if we go ahead and just use the chat feature probably. If you have that available, hopefully you do, you can type out any questions or any discussion you might have on Savannah Squares. But again, I just want to thank you for listening in. I know it was a really quick overview and I gave you a lot of information about buildings, but I kind of left a lot of information out. I'm hoping that you use that as kind of a movement within yourself to go off and do a lot more research on your own and utilize a lot of the different things I talked about today, like Georgia Historical Society or even our own archives. But I am going to open it up for questions. So if anyone has any, I'll be looking out for those chats. And then I think, I'm not sure if the audio would actually work, but we have a nice hands up feature. I think that allows you to put hands up, maybe. But if not, you definitely could send a chat and I will see it there. So I'll give it a few minutes. So far, nothing. I also see, oh, I just found a question section. I never noticed that. So here we go. Maybe there are questions located in here. Oh, someone's asking, are there examples of farm lots still in Savannah or around this area today, or have they all been developed? A really good place to kind of get an idea of that farm lot idea is at the northeastern point of downtown. If you go that way, there's an area over there kind of off of President Street that is still a large open field that would have been used for planting, and you can check that area out. That's probably the best example I can think of today, and that's going to be called the Trustees Garden. So if you want to look up the Trustees Garden, or if you want to go over to the Trustees Garden, that's kind of the closest you'll get to a farm lot in that area. Oh, someone just gave a little comment about the Publix at 12 Oaks also being modeled after City Market. So that's a nice thing that we have at least two kind of buildings honoring, although they're modern, they're honoring that building that was lost. Let's see what else we have. Somebody says, I've never seen some of the images of Telfair Square before, and what was that huge building overlooking the Telfair? So let's go back to that real fast, really quick. Let's speed through. I hope I'm not going too fast. TELFAIR. Here we go. So this building here is, again, part of, oh, it looks, I thought it was going to be this building here. It possibly, oh gosh, why am I blanking now? Let me see. We'll get back to that as I shuffle through my papers. I apologize. Let's see what else anyone has. That's actually the last question, so, or is it not? Let's see. Oh, someone's asking what my name is. It's Ryan Jarles. So the 22 squares, someone's asking how long it took to build out all, or at least the 22 that we see today. That goes in well into the late 1800s. You see squares forming into the 1890s, and those are going to be those southernmost squares. So by the early 1900s, you get the original 24, and then today, obviously, there's only 21. Let's see. Someone asked, because they missed the beginning, whether Oglethorpe used Italian or Scottish design for his inspiration. It's believed by a lot of people that it was Irish inspiration. You see a lot of square or towns formed around squares that he was studying around the time that he comes here. So it could be around that. Let's see. So that was all the questions there. If anyone has any other questions, I guess they still are in there and available. But if there are no other questions, if you do want to email me any questions after this is over, I'm just going to give my email out very quickly. It's my last name and first initial, so Jarles, Jarles, first initial R, at the MPC, so THEMPC. Oh, I see another one. Another question. When did the preservation of historic buildings start? Can the lost buildings be reconstructed? So there's a really cool recorded webinar that will become available on our website by Leah G. Mahalik that talks exactly about that kind of stuff. So I think a good way to answer that question is when it becomes available to go check out that webinar, and you'll be able to learn all the things you need to know about historic preservation in Savannah, when all of that started, and possibly some ideas on things that could or could not be reconstructed. But just a quick answer on that, can lost buildings be reconstructed? In ways they can be. So just like how Ellis Square is reconstructed, but with modern buildings around it, you do get the idea of historic buildings being reconstructed, just like how we've been talking about City Market kind of coming back to life with the Kroger just south of downtown and the Publix outside of downtown as well. You see those kind of ideas of reconstructions of buildings. When it comes to the Secretary of the Interior standards, it's really not believed that you should recreate something that already existed. New is new, right? And old is old. You don't want to give a false idea of something being historic when it isn't. So that would be kind of a shorter answer. And again, if you want to see a little bit more about preservation in Savannah, I would suggest reaching out either to myself or checking back on the website for the availability of the webinar on historic preservation here in Savannah. So I don't see currently any more questions. And I think I've had you guys for about 50 minutes, which is probably longer than most of you ever wanted that to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and just close it out with saying, please remember that we are not finished with Preservation Month. It's not over till the last day of the month. And so keep in mind that we'll have another video available, and we will have a kind of a daily idea of Instagram posts going on. Again, that's at MPC Historic Preservation on Instagram. So please check back there. And here again is the number to call. You can call in any additional questions, or again, my email is Jarles, Jarles, with my first initial R, at the THEMPC. All right, and I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to let you guys go, and I hope you have an amazing Monday. Everyone stay safe. I do want to just give a late Happy Mother's Day to everyone, since that was yesterday. And I just want to thank everyone who listened to this webinar. I saw that there were a lot of people from out of state. I counted 6 different states, at least of people I saw. So thank you everyone for spreading the word, getting it out there, and thank you for celebrating Preservation Month with us. Everyone have an amazing week.